Hello, everyone, and good whatever moment of this wonderful day you are enjoying on your time zones. It's such a joy to welcome you to a conversation part of our April series. I can't believe it's already April. We will be spending the next hour discussing about compensation and benefits, and more specifically so about how can we strategically align compensation and benefits programs with organizational goals. My name is Minola Jacques and I will be your co-host for the next hour. We have Jessa taking super good care of us backstage. I see already comments coming in from the audience, so please do let us know where you're connecting from and help us travel vicariously around the world through your comments. And then, just as I will ask Jessa to bring on the speakers on the stage, I will encourage everybody in the audience to consider this conversation just as much yours as it is our panelists. So feel free to drop your own thoughts, your own stories, your own ideas, and your own experience in the comments, because that is how we keep this community alive and inspiring, and we learn from each other. Now, what I will do, I will stop the introduction blabathon right here and hope that we can make the most out of our hour today. And the first round, you are all Hacking HR friends and veteran speakers, so you know the drill. What I will do, I will pass the e-mic around as you appear on my screen clockwise. And I will ask you to first shortly introduce yourselves and also do share with our audience a very, very short definition of compensation and benefits that you use in your everyday interactions. And also, I will just get the logistics very quickly out of the way. I will ask the panelists when you're not contributing to stay muted because that will keep us safe from echo. And that's also my secret cue that you want to jump into the conversation. And we will take it from there. Kathy, it's so great to see you.
Hi, Manola. Thank you so much. I'm happy to be on this panel. Hi, everyone. I'm Katie Fricke, and I am the Director of Base Pay and Job Architecture at Hewlett Packard Enterprise. So I run the broad-based comp program and market intelligence for that. And I also have a small business with my husband where we have a sawmill and custom wood furniture company. So we've got 9 employees there. So if you want to talk about big company or you want to talk about a really small company, I'm happy to talk about that. And my, I guess, definition around compensation and benefits are those total reward programs that are used to help attract, retain, and develop talent.
Thank you so very much. Richard, good to see you. Welcome in this conversation.
Thank you, Manola. So my name is Richard Bertner. I'm the Senior Director of Compensation at Edward Jones. Historically, I've had that experience on kind of the total rewards basis in prior roles as well. But I would define compensation and benefits very similar to what Katie mentioned. But I also think in this day and age, we're seeing that compensation and benefits are kind of the differentiating factor for organizations in terms of attracting, retaining, and motivating our associates or our colleagues at the end of the day. And we're starting to see a shift, honestly, of how our function is becoming more of a strategic advisor versus what people have kind of seen us, in the years past as more of a back office sort of support function. So we are seeing that shift, and I think we can all bring, that view and that perspective to really help support strategy in the organizations we are in.
Thank you so very much. Kim, good to see you. Welcome.
Hi, Manola. And hi, everyone else. My name's Kim Lee, and I am a Vice President of Talent Management, which includes Total Rewards. My definition of compensation and benefits is similar to what Katie and Richard have said. It encompasses obviously the base compensation, incentive compensation, bonuses, those kinds of things. So cash compensation. As well as benefits, and some of those benefits are the ones that you think of, medical, dental, vision, and all of those things. But then also, excuse me, I just see some comments that it looks like people aren't seeing us, or they're wondering if it started.
They can just refresh the screen. I saw the comments. Let's just roll with it. But we are live.
All right, sorry.
Thank you.
And then, the benefits are also not traditional. So you're engaging employees with some other like career development type opportunities for learning and kind of crossing over there.
Thank you so very much. And last but not least, making our panel complete, Rekha, welcome.
Thank you. So happy to be here today. Hi, everybody. My name is Rekha Gurnani, and I've been in the comp and ben space for about 15 years, roughly. Been in consulting roles, been in corporate roles, most recently leading compensation and people analytics at Box. And my definition, I think you all covered it really well. What I'll share is, in my experience, making comp and ben programs as successful as possible. The guiding principles that I use would be, they need to be equitable, scalable, and simple. And I think the big focus now is not just on how the program is designed, but how it's communicated. So that's where I see the shift going. But yeah, that's what comp and ben means to me at this moment.
Thank you so very much, everyone. And I do want to pick up on some of the comments. Every now and again, something happens and there's a strange tech loop. If you just refresh, it should really bring you back on into the live stream. And also anticipating some of the questions moving forward, this conversation is being recorded. So in case you missed something or in case you need to drop off before we wrap up, don't worry, you can find the recording either here on our LinkedIn space or on hackinghrlab.io, our platform. So no worries about that. I was listening to what you each and every one of you shared, and I was thinking with everything that has been impacting our workplaces, with everything that has been impacted how we define and redefine our relationship with our work and our social contracts. I was wondering, can we take just a few minutes before we dive into heavier on the tech side of the conversation? Can we look at some of the trends that you see emerging within the comp and ben dimension? And you all know, for some weird reason, I always go diagonally for the first question. So Kim, I will ask you to be our pioneer on that. And then everybody, the unmuting competition will be officially open and you just build your own conversation. So Kim, what are some of the latest trends?
Well, again, I think some of it is the non-cash compensation, looking at it as full big picture. So if you're thinking about the candidate experience, not focusing on employees, everything that you offer. So you have your base pay, if there's incentive compensation or commission or however that works out, those need to be equitable. Of course, with the transparency and a lot of the states coming up, you have to have a lot of that published, and I think that's driving some harmonization of compensation as well. And then the benefits side, what I've been pushing and kind of seeing as well is how to bring in your diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives and your benefits, bringing those together.
Thank you. Katie.
Yeah, I think just jumping on what Kim was saying, what we see a lot of trends with a lot of folks in our industry is a focus on wellness programs, right? So really trying to make sure that people are feeling taken care of from like a mental health standpoint, that they have the resources that they need, and really focusing on a lot of those initiatives to be able to bring that like whole self to work and have some of that work-life balance. So some more of those types of programs. And then, related to pay transparency, this has really boosted the need for education amongst the population, as well as our frontline managers, on how to be able to explain and even understand for themselves the intention behind different compensation and benefit initiatives.
Yeah, I would just kind of reiterate what Katie was mentioning. What we're seeing as well as, again, making the communication and the tools as simple as possible for our leaders to be able to make informed and equitable decisions across their colleagues and their associates at the end of the day. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody, but I think it continues to be a challenge within any firm or organization. I think, again, what Kim had mentioned as well in terms of looking at the various different benefits, I think the big question is for any organization that I'm seeing from my peers is, do you want to be the leaders? Do you want to be middle of the road or laggards? Do you have the funds available to make those kind of decisions at the end of the day? Because we know from any of our experiences, the CFOs are going to be looking at it from a cost perspective. So it's really interesting time, because I tell people what we saw in Comp and Ben 6 months ago is not really relevant now, and it probably won't be relevant in 6 months. That's the pace of change that I'm seeing across the industry right now. Is we're just moving so quickly. COVID really kind of ramped up our thoughts and our processes in terms of how do we think about Comp and Ben.
Okay, I guess I'll wrap that one up. I think that's the thing with going last, because all of you already covered such important trends that I think are really key right now. I think pay equity and pay transparency are probably changing the way we've done Comp and Ben for, I don't know, decades at this point. And those are the biggest sort of changes we're seeing. But what that means also for us as Comp and Ben professionals is our capabilities that we've traditionally had have had to shift and change. And now we're finding ourselves doing more communication, more enablement, more training, more just education. And so as comp teams, that's shifting. We're getting more and more out there and in front of managers and employees and directly and all of that. So I think that's a big trend that I'm seeing shift and really impact how we set up our teams internally.
Now, Richard, when we had the intro round, I made a mental post-it because you very clearly said how this function becomes more strategic. So I was wondering if we can share some insights on, first, who are some of the key stakeholders in making Comp and Ben decisions,
Sure.
and what are some of the most efficient strategies to engage with them that you have experienced?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think in our function, everybody's a stakeholder. So it's a very matrixed role, even though you have a direct report into, say, the CHRO, the head of rewards, whoever it may be. But when you really think about our function, we have numerous stakeholders, right? We have finance, we have compliance, we have legal, we have the business leaders, we have people within human capital, talent, learning and development, our HR business partners as well. So I think, one of the things that I've really tried to kind of strive for is making sure that as we start off in any sort of initiative or any sort of focus, making sure that we're casting a wide net in terms of bringing people into those discussions from a collaborative kind of ecosystem at the end of the day. The kind of the question of, how are you influencing and perspectives. One of the things that I've really seen that is a huge positive for us in the reward space or comp and benefit space is the data. And I kind of joke that, data will yell if you beat it, hard enough in terms of looking at it multiple different ways, and it'll tell you whatever you want. But I think the data point is really what people are looking for. What are the impacts to associates? What are the impacts to the business? What's the impact to the firm or organization at the end of the day? And I think if you're thinking more broadly about the upstream and downstream impacts from those decisions, does it support strategy? Does it give, the associates or colleagues a positive experience? Is it really going to do something that's kind of transformational for the firm or supporting the firm or organization at the end of the day? That's where I kind of see the link in terms of that support that, again, I think we've had, but it's becoming more prevalent in our roles and in our areas at the end of the day.
Thank you. Kim, I see you unmuted, please.
Well, I want to kind of tag on to that, especially, with the stakeholders. I think aligning the philosophy, I think that's one area that I've seen companies kind of really struggle with. I've worked in private equity for a while, so there is a lot of tension between, what the employees want and what leadership and the board is willing to do. But one thing I wanted to kind of further on that, the philosophy piece, is that some organizations want to pay, for top dollar for top people, and that's great. And then you have others who are maybe struggle with the budget, and so in nonprofit, I've seen where they boost up their benefits a little. And then going back to the private equity, a lot of that focus and a lot of that employee value proposition really is the ability to learn and train and develop. And I think that, focusing on what is it that who are you trying to target, what's your goal, and tying those together, because otherwise you're going to have a lot of tension between what your employees are saying and all the employee surveys, and the reason that they're leaving is because of compensation. If you are wanting to pay top dollar, and that's the philosophy that you have, then you have to really adjust that. And if you're looking for the more the entry level and kind of your training learning environment, you need to make sure you're focusing on that as well.
Reka.
So I just wanted to add on to that trend, and because pay transparency has become so prevalent now, and it's really a global thing at this point, where companies are being forced to think about this earlier and earlier, right? In the past, you could get away with not even having necessarily salary bands and structures and stuff set up till you got to like a few hundred employees, and you just kind of hired as needed and paid as needed. And then now, from every company has to post the salary range on the job, and then you have your candidates comparing multiple opportunities, and one of the first conversations they're having earlier and earlier than ever before is about employee value proposition. So what Kim brought up was a great point, is we have to start talking about this earlier and earlier, and companies have to be kind of intentional about what is their EVP earlier than ever before, and have that very clearly available to start talking to candidates about it. In the past, it was more like, okay, once someone's an employee, then we start kind of internally talking about our brand and things like that. But now that employee brand, which has so much to do with your entire total rewards package, is something companies have to think about earlier and earlier. And I think that's where it becomes more strategic, our involvement with the overall brand of the company.
Mm-hmm. One thing I just wanted to add on is that, we all wish that we had the resources to apply them to everyone, to do all the programs that we would want to do, and, treat all these different populations, as equally important. But at a certain point, the business needs to really focus in and prioritize on what are there specific job profiles, are there specific talent segments, are there specific areas that we want to, attract or retain. And that really goes into compensation acting as an enablement function for the business, right? So it's not just about doing everything the academically best way possible. It's about really enabling the business outcomes that you want to achieve. So like Richard mentioned around, talking to the HR business partners, what is it that the business needs from comp right now to achieve the larger goals and objectives? And then how do you, invest those resources accordingly and create strategic programs that meet those specific needs?
Katie, I would just add in when you said, kind of keyed in on the HR business partners, they really, for me, I view them as kind of the window or the door into the business, right? And how we leverage them can help create success or not success in terms of any of the initiatives or strategies that we're looking for at the end of the day. So I'm glad you really highlighted that.
Now, Reka, I'm going to ask you to be the pioneer for the next one, because I really love the angle that you brought into the conversation around the latest trends, referring to skills and capabilities that become more and more critical within the area of Comp and Ben. And I would just like to take a few minutes and go deeper into that topic. You probably heard me say this, that there are extra points available for skills and capabilities that are not necessarily immediately coming to mind and not within the circle of the usual suspects. But are there any new skills and capabilities that become more critical for Comp and Ben professionals, especially through the lens of linking this strategically with organizational goals?
Yeah, I mean, 100% what I was talking about earlier, just in the past, we would talk about compensation programs once, maybe a couple times a year when there was this big annual program that was happening. It would be internally with a few select managers, and they maybe cascaded down to their, some leaders would talk about it and then they would cascade it down. It would be maybe some sort of company intranet or whatever. But now it's like linked literally to our external employer brand with pay transparency. If you're looking at job postings at any time, even on LinkedIn, every single company will have like a little blurb now in their job postings to talk about, not just, of course, they have to share their range, but they're not going to just leave it at that. That's their opportunity to kind of share a little bit about their approach and their philosophy around total rewards, and have really kind of put their EVP out there, right? So now, as compensation and benefit professionals, it's not just about what programs we're designing anymore. It's about how we're like selling them, how we're communicating them, how we're like, how connected is it to our values and our brand and things like that. So those are new capabilities that as a compensation team, we didn't necessarily need to have. So now when I'm building a team or I'm hiring new folks on my team, I'm going to be looking for those capabilities, right? You have to be able to be good at communicating. You have to be good at like doing enablement and things like that, and really talking to a variety of stakeholders about compensation, down to like an average employee of a company. Because now we're posting ranges externally, but also in some states we share them internally as well. So that's a big shift. Of course, we can't have a panel on anything to do with HR without bringing up AI. So there's AI coming up, and I don't know how much of it has already, I know there's a lot of talk about it. I don't know what the application, I'd love to hear of this applications that have been successful, but of course there's a trend there. So now when we're hiring folks and building teams again, that capability is something that's going to be somewhat coming up, and it's important to start kind of looking for that or building for that, whether it be something as simple as writing job descriptions or doing your salary submissions and things like that, with all those manual tasks that we were doing as a compensation team. Maybe we can start leveraging the AI options for taking some of that away from our focus, so we can focus on the strategic aspects.
Thank you. Kim, I saw you unmuting yourself.
Well, I wanted to kind of double down on the communication and enablement. And it's true, being able to speak to what your plan is with I want to bring in again employee value proposition, because that really ties into how those conversations go. And I think managers, supervisors, leaders all need to know how to have those conversations as well. Again, kind of there's different philosophies and there's different employee value propositions. So if an employee goes out to, and sees some job postings that are showing a much higher salary, being able to articulate the differences, so that you can help them understand that their actual total rewards package, this is what it looks like, and this is what we're committing to. So I think that communication piece is really important, and I think it's a really key skill.
Katie,
Yeah.
and then Richard.
Yeah, and even before you get into communication, you need to be able to understand your different customers and stakeholder audiences, right? So because you have to communicate to these different personas in different ways, because they have different needs and different things that they're looking for. So Richard, all your comments on being on HR business partners, so that's really my background. I've only been in comp for about a year, but I have the majority of my career being in the business partner role. So a lot of experience in terms of, okay, what is actually the understanding of the management population? Where's the executive group coming from? What are team members wanting to know, right? So when we've done a lot of work in our compensation space in this year, I'm leveraging a lot of that knowledge to say, how do we approach all of the customer groups and anticipate their needs and their questions and get in front of them with the right level of information that's hitting what they want to know, right? And how do we prepare those managers to be able to talk about it? So I think the communication is key, but what you're communicating in the right way also makes a big difference.
Yeah, and I think I just kind of add on to what everybody said. I think the skills that or capabilities that I'm starting to see kind of a change on AI. Obviously, I think even Hacking HR is coming out with a certificate or a program around AI or Chat GPT. We are seeing the ability to kind of use that from a job description perspective. So, Katie, when you mentioned about kind of resources, I think we can all admit when you think about a comp and benefits team, it's a small but mighty group. Traditionally, not a lot of resourcing that's associated with it. So, how do you address those needs, right, in terms of the stakeholders and the wants and the needs? And I think that's another kind of aspect is the businesses and stakeholders want everything, but what do they need, right? So I think it's kind of splitting kind of the understanding of wants versus needs. I think it's also very important in the comp and ben space to really have a deep understanding of the businesses that you're supporting at the end of the day, making sure, to Kim's point in terms of the philosophy, is does our philosophy fit, right? In terms of the organization, in terms of the business units, et cetera. Because I think we can all agree, even within a firm, from segment to segment or business to business, there is a little bit of a different culture, right? So we can have the overarching culture at the high end, but there are going to be different needs. So do we think about segmentation, deep subject matter expertise in terms of the business? How does that business operate? Is the philosophy going to support that, or is it in contradiction? So again, everything that my peers have said here is kind of spot on. I think also I'm starting to see kind of a shift in terms of traditionally you would maybe have a comms person kind of dedicated to the reward space. But again, in firms, resources are thin. And I'm starting to see that kind of shift to where we have to take all of our knowledge institutionally or through experiences and socialize that and not take kind of the stance of it is what it is, but also kind of having that soft tone and that soft approach because of what we're seeing in terms of the change in the dynamics in our culture in the world right now. It's a very different world today than it was a couple of years ago.
Mm. Well, as we are fast approaching the middle of our conversation, I would love to make this conversation even more actionable. And Katie, since you said that you bring the best of both worlds, the view from big organizations and the view from small organizations, I would invite you to go first. And how can we best determine how and where to invest when it comes to comp and ben?
Yeah, I don't know if it's the best of both worlds, but it's something from both of the worlds. So, I think it's really around what you have to identify. What are the areas that you want to prioritize as a business, right? Because once you focus in on that, then you're able to segment that population. So like I said before, is it a particular job profile, particular skill, a particular segment of that population? And then even from there, you can segment it further by focusing in on performance, focusing in on potential, who's on your succession plans, to really make sure that you are differentiating rewards in an appropriate way and helping to make sure that your managers understand the purpose of that differentiation and that they are also prepared to have those conversations, right? So for every business, you really have to look at what your driving objectives are, and you have to be okay to acknowledge that, okay, we're investing in this area. That means we might not be investing as much in this area, which means that we may have some, attrition there, right? Or some other loss. But you acknowledge that, hey, here's where we're prioritizing, right? And shift some of that funding and that investment resources over there. And it just has to do with whatever is needed to drive the particular needs of your business. And maybe it's being reactive, right? But you have to have an understanding of, if you are being reactive, what are the unintended consequences of that? So for example, like retention bonuses, right? If you feel like you need to stop the bleeding from a certain talent segment and you want to go after that with retention bonuses, well, does that become kind of this expected entitlement going forward that they're going to be out the door as soon as those expire if they don't renew, right? What are other ways that you can focus in on a population and understand what's meaningful to them? Maybe you can bundle purchase a bunch of certification programs that take 6 to 12 months to complete. Folks feel like they're getting an investment in their own learning and development, and they're retained for the period of time they're working on that certification as well before you can do something else. So there's creative ways that you can approach that too, depending on the talent segment.
Thank you. Kim.
Well, I wanted to touch on, you kind of got there, Katie, as well, but you tie pay for performance and you tie philosophy. I keep going back to that, but if you have a merit process, is that simply a cost of living adjustment, or are you calling it a pay for performance, but giving everyone the kind of the peanut butter spread? So you really have to double down on that philosophy and education, and so people understand what it is that they're getting, and what the benefit is, what their total reward package is, and why, helping managers understand why, if you're rating somebody, say, they're a top performer, that we need to treat them a little bit differently. What are you committing to? And that's what we have implemented and discussed with our leaders is, when you're talking about succession planning, you're talking about those kinds of things, you rating somebody very high, you have to also invest in their development. What are you doing with, for them? We can't just throw money at them. And I like what you said about retention bonuses, Katie. That's always kind of the reactive, we need to do something, especially when dealing with a lot of acquisitions, right? Which private equity does, is there's a whole list of it. And then as soon as those pay out, people do start to, leave. They wait for that time, and it gets very complex. So trying to get ahead of that is the best, but we can't always do that.
And I think the question is kind of a loaded question of where do you kind of prioritize? And I think we can all agree in any firm or organization, priorities change. Priorities change on macro and microeconomic developments. I think we've been waiting for the R word, the recession, over the last 2 years, and that narrative has kind of changed over the last 3 or 4 months. But a lot of firms made those decisions to go through reductions in forces, freeze increases, and things like that. I think we have to be, as a function, very agile in terms of understanding where that focus is. And being flexible in terms of the pivots that our business is looking for. So again, like I said, I think it's a loaded question about where do we prioritize at the end of the day. I think we can also think about, when you think about IT several years ago, that there were hot jobs, and there's now new jobs, right? In terms of prompt masters and things like that are coming up. We see it in the compliance area when you're thinking about banking and financial services. Back in, kind of the Great Recession, how much more emphasis was put on a regulatory aspect. I think it's again difficult to kind of say where do we need to prioritize, but I think what my peers have mentioned is, how does our philosophy support, right? Do we have a good pay for performance? Do we have good performance management? Where are we in the maturity curve as a firm or organization? Do we see a lot of people just giving everybody exceeds or outstanding ratings? And then to your point, Kim, it creates the peanut butter approach, right? But it's easy for a manager to have that because they don't have to have a hard conversation. So I think there's also the linkage of, we can't be the only ones driving kind of for the priorities or the strategy. We have to have that partnership in from our talent teams, our HR business partners, et cetera, to be able to really kind of move that needle forward.
Richard, I would agree, with the business partners, and this is where it all comes together. I think that you can't, total rewards at one point was, kind of data and spreadsheets and that. Yeah. And what it is now is really helping to combine and drive those strategies, the objectives, listening to, you're right, the business partners, and where they're seeing some challenges, where they agree with those challenges, and then how do we go back and really educate managers and leaders to have those conversations and what those look like.
Agree.
Reka, you're in the hot seat of going last again.
Okay, so what I'll say to wrap this all up is, when you are faced with making those prioritization decisions, what I typically rely on is, making as much data-driven decisions as possible. And we all know right now there's a lot of decisions around total rewards or just people practices in general that are just being made on personal preferences or intuition, gut, whatever, things like that. And that's where I'm like, when you are faced with those decisions, whatever they may be, let's bring as much data-driven decision-making into the process and do our part as compensation and benefits or people analytics professionals to bring that in to our leaders. So first figuring out what are your organizational outcomes that you want to prioritize, and then constantly sort of monitoring and tracking your programs and measuring if you're actually achieving those outcomes, right? And to some of the points that Katie brought up and Kim brought up is around retention bonuses and around kind of bringing in someone high in pay range and things like that may not necessarily have the intended consequences. And there's really no way to know that unless you're tracking that data and kind of sharing that with the stakeholders. So that's what I'll say is there could be so many different shifting priorities, but as long as we have a consistent process and how we'll make those decisions as and when we face them, that's where I think we also need to focus on.
We touched on non-monetary benefits every now and again, but I do want to take the conversation around those a little bit deeper. And how can we best leverage the non-monetary benefits and workplace flexibility when it comes to compensation and benefits? And Richard, would you lead us into this?
Sure. And I'm just looking at one of the questions Kendra put in there. I think that also kind of plays into what we are offering from a benefits perspective, is looking at the generational divides. And I remember doing this at one firm in particular, where we looked at the priorities in terms of, say, time off, benefits, and compensation or pay. And you could see a true kind of delineation, right? For the later stage in the career, the benefits, healthcare, et cetera, was more important, time off, than pay, because when you think about it, you've probably hit your maturity curve in terms of your comp, versus the younger or the earlier in career are more focused about pay, time off, and then benefits, because God bless them, they don't have as many health issues as the folks of my age do. So you are seeing kind of a shift in terms of what is being offered. I think if we all remember, kind of the big thing several years ago was unlimited time off, right? And whether or not that was going to promote greater kind of, flexibility and kind of a greater self awareness for individuals at the end of the day. And I think what we've seen and what we've heard is, while with good and kind of good intent, hasn't really worked in all firms or organizations. Meaning that the work still has to get done. So it's not that you're leaving and you can not have to work and still get paid. There's also kind of, the firms that have allowed people to accrue all this time off, so when they get towards the end and retire, have a big payout, right? It's also kind of a line item expense for firms when they think about it, from accruing and rolling over time as well, when you have kind of the differences. So again, I think it's, again, to Kendra's point or question is, it's not a one size fits all. We cannot say that this is going to work for 100% of our associates or colleagues. But it's kind of the old adage. You can make some people happy, some of the time. You can't make everybody happy all of the time, right? And it's really what's going to support kind of our culture at the end of the day. So if we're about wellness, are we introducing kind of, different apps, Mindspace, things like that? Are we offering, kind of, again, different opportunities for individuals? And I don't even consider benefits such as, opportunities within the firm to do swing space opportunities. That could be considered a benefit as well for individuals, because it's promoting growth and development as well.
Katie.
Yeah, I think I'll chime in a little bit on some of the things that I see at HPE in terms of some flexible benefits. We have also things like Headspace app and different, like, it's free for doctor on demand visits, so you can have virtual doctor visits. We offer backup child care, elder care, self-care if needed, to really help people to navigate issues that come up. But I think even more than all of these different wellness and ancillary things that are coming out of the benefits space that I love is the culture. right? What is your company culture? And do people feel a strong connectedness? Do they feel like they can get things done, that folks work together well? Like I pride myself with both companies that I talk about, have a strong culture where people say that they feel like they can bring themselves to work. And, sometimes people say, hey, I know I might be able to go over here and make more money, but I really love the work I do. I love the people that I work with. I have autonomy in my space, and that really motivates me to stay. So we know that that is a factor beyond just straight up compensation.
Reka.
I'll chime in. I think Kendra's question was about also communicating to different age groups and generations and all of that. And in addition to obviously making sure that the needs of different employee populations are being met through our offering, which I think you both talked about, but also communicating that. And I think that's where maybe AI can be leveraged. I don't know if anybody has any personal experiences with this, but I'm hearing a lot about how there's sort of these AI applications being developed for internal communications within companies. So I think that could be leveraged to really appeal to different segments of the population where you're sort of interacting with, instead of the typical, like for years we've had benefits and documents available somewhere where you could go click on a PDF and read all about it and everything. I think just kind of leveraging AI to have it more interactive, where you could literally say, this is what I'm dealing with in my life. How can the company help me? And then it's like, here's what is available. Here's where you can go for more resources and things like that. So perhaps that could be a way to address the needs of the communication style needs of different generations in the workplace.
I like that. I would also say that you have to have different media channels, different communication channels. Some people like email, some people like chat, some people want to go to a website and see what they're looking for. So trying to leverage a variety of different channels is, I think, also very helpful.
Well, thank you so much for picking up Kendra's question, because I saw it and it inspired a wider slice of the conversation. And Kim, I will ask you to grab the e-mic again, because it was you who tied Comp and Ben with DEI very early on in our conversation. If I remember it correctly, it was around, it was during the intro round. So generation is one way to look at the workforce. But I was wondering, are there any other DIB elements or intersectionalities that play into the Comp and Ben decisions, design and decisions?
Absolutely. I think that when we start looking at what our DEIB goals are, what we're our objectives are, and tying that back to what we're communicating externally and what's happening internally, I think it's very important that if you're focusing on, trying to diversify your either age or gender or anything, whether it's race or sexuality, any of those, you need to tie that in. So if I'm saying I'm very focused and I really want to have my objective and goal is to increase a certain population diversity, when they get in the door, we should have things that match that. So if I'm focused on, I want to increase working mothers, I want to increase our, that goal. When they get in there, they should probably have a little more flexibility as a company, not just that, specific population. We should have a little more flexibility because, again, if we're looking at working mothers, we should have benefits that help them support their family. We're looking at that. If you are looking at people in the LGBTQIA population or community, we need to support as far as our medical coverage, make sure that we have benefits that support that. So when they're, what we're saying externally, our employee value proposition, our goals and objectives, we can tie that into and look at how we treat the benefits, how we treat, whether it's time off or any of those things. So I think it's really important to keep that lens in mind.
I love that, Kim. And I think that so many companies could also do a better job. Like they may have a lot of these benefits available, but they don't always advertise it very well on the front end from an EVP standpoint for candidates. I know I've had this argument before too, even just like recruiting university and new grads, because sometimes they say, oh, they don't necessarily care about this stuff. But man, as a new grad, I would love to know that my company offered 6 months paid time off after new parent leave for both men and women, right? I would have loved to know also, like, so whenever I came over to HPE, I was like, oh, I'm going to have another kid, so this is going to be good, right? So I definitely wanted to take advantage of that benefit. But also, I was doing breastfeeding too, and they had a milk ship program. So when I was on a business trip, I could, have these like ice pack cooler thing and ship it back. And it supported me throughout that stage of my life as part of the business, right? And some of those benefits you kind of had to search around and dig for, even though they existed. So I think there's a lot more going back to that communication to draw people in and say, hey, here's what we have for you, right? I think there's more that companies can do, even if they already have them in place.
Yeah, I mean, I think what Kim and Katie have said is spot on, right? Is we've got to advocate more, or the firms have to be able to advocate more for kind of sharing those nuggets, because they may be small percentages of the population or bigger pieces of the population. But I think one thing that I'll throw out for kind of food for thought is when we think about the DEI perspective, and it's not necessarily a comp and ben perspective, but it's about how do we get more individuals in the door, maybe from underrepresented segments. So one thing that I continue to hear, and I don't know if it's again, making its way through organizations, is degree requirements for jobs. At what level do we say it's not a requirement anymore, right? To be a financial analyst or somebody like that, you can have the work experience, right? That allows us to kind of branch into, again, those underrepresented groups at the end of the day, to kind of bring more people into the firm that maybe would not have had an opportunity before that. So again, I'm starting to see that shift, but again, I'm not hearing it as much as one would hope, that we would kind of start to, again, extend into those areas that, again, can help create that diversity, equity, and inclusion for firms.
Reka.
Yeah. So what I'll add there is just really kind of bringing in that that question earlier about different generations, like different life stages. Everybody cares about different things at each point, and so really kind of having, we all need to do a better job of kind of just advertising everything that we offer and really kind of putting it out there, not just that once a year when you have open enrollment time or you have your annual event, like just always available. And again, I'll come back to how, like, I think AI can really be leveraged in this particular application to benefit us. I recently talked to someone and they were talking about how they did some research on preferences among different generations, and the more younger generations, the Gen Zs and those that are entering the workforce, they actually care a lot about things like the companies like corporate social responsibility efforts, impact investing, and like things like that, more than like the generations before them. So it's really interesting to see the trends shifting. And again, it's all about just making the information available to them at the point that they need it. So really kind of thinking about how, again, coming back to communication, I think most companies are doing a lot, or at least they have the right intention and what they want to offer to their employees. But we don't always do a really good job of making that known to them at the point that they need to know, right? I might have read something when I first started at the company, the orientation week. There was this big benefits document, or like someone came and talked to me about benefits in the first week. And then like 3 years later, I might have a financial wellness need or something else going on. And I don't even remember that was offered, right? So I think it keeps coming back to that communication piece and how can we get better at that?
Mm-hmm. I was listening to everything that you have shared so far, and I do have a personal curiosity, if we can call it like that. When it comes to conversations with line managers, I am curious, what has been lately the most common misassumption or misperception around compensation and benefits that you have encountered? How have you addressed it to advance the conversation in a more meaningful way? And I will let this go popcorn style. But Richard, I saw you smiling, so I
Yes,
kind of knew you would go first.
I love it. Honestly, the one thing I keep hearing about, and I think Kim, you mentioned it kind of earlier on, is how companies communicate about inflation, interest rates, wage growth, right? All of those factors come into how organizations determine compensation. But I think employees or colleagues really are kind of caught in kind of the media perspective about inflation, right? And so I've heard over the last several years of, well, what are we going to do about cost of living allowances? But when you think about it, really firms focus on cost of labor. How much does the labor cost us in that particular area? So it's having conversations with leaders to really educate them about how does it work, right? Yes, cost of living is different between New York and say Texas or San Francisco versus Florida, right? At the end of the day, but there are other factors: state income tax, city income tax, things like that, no state income tax. And it's really trying to educate individuals of how we look at it. So inflation, for example, is a factor, but it's not a leading factor or indicator that we're looking at. We're looking at what does it cost us to hire an analyst in, say, San Francisco versus New York City versus Boston, et cetera. What does that cost us at the end of the day? And I think people and managers in particular and associates as well keep talking about inflation. Well, inflation is in pockets right now, right? We're seeing high inflation in terms of auto insurance, homeowners insurance, gasoline prices. I think the other factor that we're looking at right now is interest rates are at the highest they've ever been. So while inflation is taming, right, at the end of the day, what we're seeing from borrowing cost, mortgages, auto loans, personal loans, credit cards, et cetera, those rates are at the highest. So people have this sense that, again, you have less money at the end of the day because of all these other factors. But that's where I've really tried to kind of educate our leaders of, yes, it is a factor, but if we had made salary decisions based on June of 2022 when inflation was at 9.1%, where would the firm or organization be today, right? We'd be at very high fixed cost, while we've seen inflation tame down to about 3.2% recently. So again, I think that is one of the things I continue to hear because it's been in the media, right? It comes out, the market reacts to it as well, and is driving a lot of kind of nervousness or anxiety throughout associates and leaders as well.
Thank you. Kim.
I have employees in the UK, and to that, there was enormous inflation across the world, but certainly they were feeling it in a variety of different ways. And I know that was a conversation that we had to have and explain. We don't base our compensation decisions or our increases or budget based on inflation, because there's other years that there's really limited inflation, and then you wouldn't want that same driver. So having a lot of education around that, Richard, I agree, and because you just have to understand that this works in a different way. We can't just say, okay, well, inflation is 9%, so everyone gets 9%, because then we're going to have a lot more reduction in force because we can't keep up with the budget.
Yeah, and oh, sorry, Katie.
No, go, Reka, and then we go, Katie.
Because there's such to what Richard and Kim are saying, there's such a localized aspect to how we pay. Another thing that had been coming up lately with different ways of working and things like that was the whole thing about should there just be one rate of pay nationally and things like that. And I think that's another thing that hopefully in the last year or two it's kind of normalized a little bit. I think companies were reacting in the first couple of years of COVID on how much they even wanted, where did they stand on the whole remote versus hybrid versus in office and all of that, and then how do they want pay to go along with that, right? What behaviors are they trying to incentivize? But because there's such a local market aspect to what drives pay, and it's actually in many ways societally like almost irresponsible to just have like one national rate of pay. The other thing is also about what does national rate mean, right? Are we literally just taking an average? Like let's just take US for example. If we take a national rate of average US pay, does that work if you live in San Francisco or New York City? Or and then is it too low for those, or too high for like another part of the country? Or when people say national pay, are they just saying take the highest rate of pay and apply that everywhere? And how is that going to be fiscally or socially responsible and things like that? But so that's another one that I think was a big topic for the last few years, and I think hopefully it's kind of come down and normalized a little bit.
Yeah, we've also been looking at our geographic differentials to see, like around the world, really, not just in the US, but to see like, hey, is there opportunity to simplify, or what does the data tell us? Oh, maybe these need to stay in place, right? But hey, I don't know how frequently companies look at these geographic differentials. So it's good to take a data-driven approach and really check in on it, right? Just to chime in on the inflation topic, I think it's important to make sure that team members and managers understand that like merit increases and the salary ranges are based on market movement, like Richard was mentioning. But, even when it comes to inflation, I'd say that's not a driving factor. But in a global organization, there's a lot of different countries that you might need to handle in different ways. So there were some countries where we needed to initiate some temporary discretionary aid for, like I said, a temporary period of time, right? Where we were looking at those. And then there's other countries that have even more dynamic circumstances combined with inflation, market movement, and currency changes, right? So, really focusing in on some of those more volatile markets, and how do you ensure that you're doing the right thing for your employees and your business in those particular countries. Another thing, whenever Manila, you mentioned, what are some misconceptions? I feel like first line managers have misconceptions on how the salary range is created and how to use it effectively. Right. And I think that also, depending on the way that your compensation philosophy has ebbed and flowed throughout the years in your organization, people might be stuck on that philosophy from 20 years ago, that you hire really low in the band and then like eventually you'll move people up. And we have seen that that doesn't always work all that well. Right? So bringing people in at a fair rate of pay for their skills and capabilities that they're bringing in, and not necessarily getting a good deal if you can get it from the front end, right? So I think I see a lot of that. And then even we get questions on like, well, what was the peer group and how did you do this? Because I feel like I have to pay really high in the range for this particular set of skills. And that might be the case too, but it doesn't mean that the range is wrong. Right? It may mean that that's the appropriate place. So helping people to really understand how that came about and what this might mean for them and their specific team. Otherwise, I think you get into grade shopping, and then managers are doing a disservice to themselves. Right? So that's a whole other area that I think requires additional education.
Thank you so very much. And it's incredibly painful and frustrating to say that we are 2 minutes away from wrapping this conversation up. I feel that this topic could drive a whole series in and of itself. But let's do the mic drop, wrap up, value dance round. And I'm a journalist by trade. I'm a change practitioner by choice. And I believe in the infinite power of questions. So my last question to you for the mic drop round is, do you have a signature question or a particularly powerful question in your Comp and Ben conversations that you have seen unlocking a different way of thinking, a different way of going around the decisions? And what I will do, I will pass the e-mic around in the interest of time, counterclockwise, which means, Reka, you will go first on this one. I will give you a few seconds to think. So it has to be very, very short. In the meantime, I will wholeheartedly thank everybody in the audience for taking the time and the curiosity to be here, and Jessa for taking care of us. And Reka, ready to go. So half a minute.
this one I wanted to go last. Okay. I think asking that question about, for example, inflation, if we did this when inflation is high, what about when it's the other way, right? When it's low, would you want the same treatment? I think that would open up some different way of thinking about it.
Thank you so very much. Kim.
I'm going to go with the grade shopping. One that I've experienced is that, you know, a manager either wants to give a promotion and title but not pay, or something like that. I'm sure we've all heard that, right? And the question is, what are you going to do next? Because this is the time that you have the budget. If you lowball them or you put them at the bottom, you're only going to get incremental opportunities to give them an increase. So consider that before, you know, when you're making your comp decisions.
Thank you. Richard.
It's not a question, but it's more of a comment that I think really unlocks conversations. I always kind of start with, it's not about yes or no, it's about how. And I've really seen that open it up as well, because that lets the business or the HR business partner know that we're not coming in with a specific frame of reference or a mindset. We're open. And we're also about what is right. How do we get there? How do we, you know, solidify the experience for the associate, the department, the business, et cetera. And that really has unlocked a lot for me in terms of my partnerships throughout any of the organizations. Again, it's not about yes, it's not about no, it's about how. I use it all the time.
Thank you so very much. Katie.
Yeah, I'd say people come to me and they say, hey, I want to do this. And I say, well, that depends. What are you trying to achieve? Right. And then we get into what they're trying to do and see what option might make the most sense.
Katie, Richard, Kim, and Reka, it's been such a joy witnessing this conversation from a front row seat. And I hope I will get the pleasure to host you again on my screen. In the meantime, happy conversations, everyone. And in about 1 hour, we will be hosting a conversation part of the Inclusive Workforce series. So I hope I will get to welcome you there as well. And thank you, everybody, for your time and your energy and your generosity of sharing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.